Before we dive into this latest sci-fi epic, drop a quick hi in the comments. It may seem small, but trust me, it really helps YouTube share this story with more sci fans like us. I'd love to see who's watching.
Nexus Point Station wasn't just a place in space, it was a huge statement. It was built to show off the power and big dreams of the Stellar Concordat, the massive group of planets and species that worked together, mostly. This giant station floated in the dark emptiness between three different star systems. It looked like a spinning knot made of metal and lights, a connection point for countless worlds. Ships from 100 known planets, and probably some unknown ones too, docked in its massive rings every day. Inside, its wide walkways and giant plazas buzzed with the sounds of 1,000 languages. Clicks, whistles, rumbles, and songs. The air systems worked overtime, cleaning and mixing air for everyone, from slow-moving rock creatures that looked like living boulders to quick, skittering bug aliens that breathed methane gas from tanks on their backs. The Concordat had been around for thousands of years, a sprawling empire of trade and treaties. They liked to boast about how everyone was included, how they welcomed all kinds of life. But like any giant, old organization, some members had more power, more history, and more respect than others. The newer members, the smaller groups, often found themselves stuck in the shadows, easily ignored. The Glyptians, from the planet Glyptos, a world known for its lush green jungles and constant ground tremors, were definitely one of those smaller groups. They'd only been part of the Concordat for about 60 years, barely a heartbeat in galactic time. Compared to ancient species that had traveled the stars for millennia, they were babies. Glyptians looked pretty normal, by galactic standards anyway. They walked on two legs, were generally slim, and had large eyes that showed a lot of what they were thinking. Their most unique feature was their skin, which glowed softly with shifting patterns of light, changing color based on their feelings. Happy was warm yellows and oranges, sad was cool blues, scared was stark white or flashing yellow, angry was deep reds or purples. Most other aliens didn't pay them much attention. Their spaceships worked, but weren't fast or fancy. Their computers and tools were basic. They didn't have an army, and their planet didn't produce anything super valuable that other worlds wanted to buy, so they didn't bring much money into the Concordat's banks. But the biggest reason they were often pushed aside was how open they were with their feelings. Glyptians couldn't really hide how they felt. It wasn't just the glowing skin. A faint energy field surrounded each of them, broadcasting their mood like a personal radio station that most other aliens could pick up on. It wasn't mind reading, more like feeling a vibe off them. Happiness felt like standing in warm sunshine. Sadness felt like a cold breeze. Anger felt like tiny static shocks on your skin. For many species, especially those who valued control and privacy, this was just weird. It felt intrusive, like someone was airing their dirty laundry in public. Or worse, it seemed childish, a sign that Glyptians couldn't control themselves like proper, grown-up members of the galactic community should. Lyra knew all about this. She was a young Glyptian working at her planet's tiny, underfunded embassy on Nexus Point. Her official job was Junior Cultural Attaché. That meant she was supposed to help other species understand Glyptian culture, maybe set up some art shows or music performances. But her real job felt like just surviving each day. She constantly dealt with aliens talking down to her, making snide remarks. Could you perhaps try to keep your flickering to a minimum during the negotiations? It's quite distracting. Or simply acting like she wasn't there. Her own skin, which she consciously kept in calm blues and greens most of the time, felt less like a part of her and more like a giant sign saying, "Look at the weird, emotional alien." She missed Glyptos, missed being where feeling openly wasn't strange, but normal, essential. She remembered gatherings back home, where the shifting colors of the crowd created beautiful, complex patterns, a silent language understood by all. Here, it just made her a target. One of the most powerful figures on Nexus Point was Commander Vorlag. He was a Kthar, and the Kthar were one of the oldest, most respected, and most feared species in the Concordat. They were famous for their iron discipline, their cold logic, their complete lack of visible emotion, and their fleet of powerful, gray warships. They were one of the groups that had founded the Concordat ages ago. Vorlag was the perfect Kthar. He was tall and imposing, always encased in tough, dark gray armor that covered him from head to toe, except for narrow slits for his sharp, piercing eyes that seemed to analyze everything they saw. He moved with a spooky, perfect precision, every step exact, every gesture controlled. His voice, when he spoke, was a flat monotone, like a computer reading text. Feelings, to Vorlag and his people, were messy biological functions that got in the way of clear thinking. They were weaknesses to be overcome, or even dangers to be eliminated. And Vorlag seemed to have a special dislike for the Glyptians. Their open emotions, their feeling broadcasts, weren't just childish in his eyes. They were like a disease, a dangerous lack of control spreading through the station. Things got really tense during what everyone later called the Xylosian fiber incident. A Glyptian merchant named Rylan, who had just arrived on Nexus Point for the first time, was completely overwhelmed by the noise, the crowds, the smells, the sheer alienness of the station. He was trying to negotiate a deal to buy some rare, shimmering silk from the planet Xylos. During the tense bargaining, Rylan's anxiety spiked. He couldn't help it. His skin flashed a bright, panicked red, and his feeling field pulsed outwards with strong waves of worry and fear. The Cthar trader across the table, who had likely never felt such a direct blast of raw emotion in his life, physically recoiled, his own face hidden behind a helmet, but his rigid posture screamed discomfort. He immediately declared Rylan emotionally unstable and canceled the potentially valuable trade deal on the spot. Vorlag heard about it almost instantly and saw his chance. He had Rylan detained by Cthar security guards, not for breaking any real law, but for disrupting Concordat commerce through uncontrolled emotive projection. It was a made-up charge, but Vorlag had the power to make it stick. Then, he broadcast a message across the entire station's public address system. In his flat voice, he reminded everyone, putting extra emphasis on newer members of the Concordat, of the absolute necessity for emotional regulation and control in all public spaces and business dealings. The message was clear: Glyptians, control yourselves, or else. Lyra had been nearby, trying to help Rylan navigate the station's confusing trade sector. She saw the Cthar guards lead the terrified merchant away. Her own skin flared a deep, angry purple, a color she quickly tried to smother back to blue. Across the crowded plaza, she saw Vorlag watching. He wasn't smiling, Cthar didn't smile, but the slight, almost invisible tightening around his eyes was his version of a sneer. He knew she was there. He wanted her to witness this humiliation of her people. He wanted her to feel powerless. And she did. In the weeks that followed, Lyra tried to push back in her own small way. She poured her energy into setting up a display of Glyptian resonance sculptures. These were beautiful, intricate crystal lattices that Glyptian artists grew back home. They glowed with soft, shifting internal light and emitted very gentle, calming feeling waves: peace, connection, harmony. She hoped it might show other species that Glyptian emotions weren't just messy outbursts, but could be focused, even artistic. After a lot of paperwork, she managed to get permission to use a small, out-of-the-way room in one of the station's less popular cultural wings. At first, hardly anyone came, but slowly, word spread among some of the quieter, more thoughtful species. A few scholars, artists, and weary travelers found their way to the little room and reported feeling strangely peaceful, less stressed, after spending time among the glowing crystals. Lyra felt a small spark of hope. Maybe this could work. Maybe this was a way to build a bridge. Then, the anonymous complaints started showing up at the station administration office. Vague reports about unsettling psychic vibes coming from the Glyptian exhibit. Concerns about potential for emotional manipulation. Lyra suspected Cthar agents were encouraging disgruntled individuals or maybe even filing fake complaints themselves. Predictably, the station bureaucracy, likely nudged by Vorlag's office, suddenly discovered an urgent need for the room Lyra was using. Funding for the cultural wing was reallocated. Her permit was revoked. The resonance sculpture exhibit was shut down, barely a month after it opened. Lyra felt a crushing sense of defeat. She knew Vorlag was behind it, pulling strings from the shadows, making sure the Glyptians stayed in their place. She tried filing a formal complaint, navigating the station's maze-like administration offices, but was met with polite dismissals and bureaucratic runarounds. Her request for information was under review. No one would meet with her. It was clear Vorlag's influence ran deep. Feeling isolated, she sought out Dr. Eris Thorne. He was a human scientist, a xenopsychologist, someone who studied the minds and behaviors of different alien species. Humans were relatively neutral in Concordat politics, and Thorne seemed genuinely interested in Glyptian empathy, not judgmental about it. They met in a noisy cafe down in Sector 7, a rougher part of the station known for its black markets and shady dealings, a place Thorne said was good for people watching. It's tough, Lyra, Thorne said, stirring his cup of nutrient paste. The cafe buzzed with a dozen different species, a chaotic mix of sights and sounds. Most spacefaring species, especially those in the Concordat, have spent centuries learning how to block things out. Mental shields, emotional filters, cultural habits, ways to keep the noise of a billion minds from driving you crazy. You need privacy, control, to function in a place like this. He gestured around them. But Glyptians evolved differently. On Glyptos, that constant sharing of feelings, that empathy, was your strength. It built trust, cooperation, held your society together through all those earthquakes. He smiled wryly. Out here, though, for species like the Cthar, who value control above all else, it's not just weird, it's threatening. It's like you're constantly shouting secrets in a library where everyone else is trying to think. But why does Vorlag hate us so much? Lyra asked, her skin a dull, unhappy gray. It feels personal, like he wants to erase us. Thorne leaned forward, lowering his voice. The Cthar, they're a fascinating case study in repression. Their history isn't widely known, they keep it quiet, but their records hint at something catastrophic centuries ago. A massive civil war, fueled by extreme emotions, factions tearing each other apart. They call it the Great Schism. It almost destroyed their species. Ever since then, their entire culture has been ruthlessly rebuilt around one single principle: suppress all emotion. Logic, order, control. Feelings are the enemy within, the chaos that nearly wiped them out. They drill it into their children from birth. Some whisper they've even used genetic engineering to dull their emotional responses over generations. He looked at Lyra seriously. So when Vorlag sees your people living so openly with your feelings, broadcasting them for all to sense, you represent the very thing his entire civilization defines itself against. You're a living reminder of the chaos they fear is lurking just beneath their own controlled surface. That explanation hit Lyra hard. It wasn't just simple prejudice, like someone disliking her for having strange skin. It was a deep, fundamental conflict between two entirely different ways of being, two different strategies for survival. Vorlag wasn't just a bully enforcing rules. In his own mind, he was probably protecting his people, protecting the Concordat itself, from what he saw as a dangerous, destabilizing influence. That didn't make his actions right, but it made them scarier. The big explosion point finally arrived during the Concordat Trade Summit. This was a massive event, held only once every 10 standard years, right there on Nexus Point. Top leaders, ambassadors, and megacorporation bosses came from every corner of Concordat space. Security was cranked up to maximum. The station buzzed with nervous energy and high-stakes deals. Commander Vorlag, naturally, was in charge of all security, and he seemed to relish the power, his gray-armored Cthar guards patrolling everywhere like emotionless statues. In the middle of all this, a very tricky negotiation was happening about mining rights in the star system where Glyptos was located. The system was officially neutral territory, but it contained valuable minerals that a huge corporation, known to be friendly with the Cthar, desperately wanted. The small Glyptian delegation, led by a nervous elder diplomat, felt completely overwhelmed and outmatched. Then, disaster struck. Right in the middle of a flashy presentation by the Cthar-backed corporation, a highly sophisticated computer virus, a logic bomb, hit the station's main trade network database. Screens flickered, data streams froze, and the complex financial systems underpinning billions of credits worth of deals ground to a halt. A wave of shock and low-key panic spread through the summit halls. Vorlag acted instantly. He sealed off the entire summit sector, his flat voice cutting through the rising murmur on the comms. Security analysis indicates the malware signature contains algorithmic markers consistent with Glyptian programming protocols. All security teams locate and detain the Glyptian delegation for immediate questioning. Lyra had been sitting quietly at the back of the negotiation room, observing and trying to send calming vibes towards her delegation leader. When she heard Vorlag's announcement, a freezing dread washed over her. Her skin flashed a bright, sickly yellow, pure fear. It was impossible. Glyptian programming was notoriously simple. They couldn't have created a virus this complex if they'd tried for 100 years. Someone was framing them. It had to be Vorlag, or the corporation, or both. Before she could even stand up, Cthar guards were surrounding her section. Their blank, helmeted faces felt more threatening than any snarl or shout could have been. Attaché Lyra, one of them intoned, his voice as flat as his commander's. "Commander Vorlag requires your presence. Now." They didn't take her to a small, private security office for a quiet chat. Instead, they marched her directly into the main summit observation chamber. This huge, glass-walled room overlooked the central plaza and was usually filled with important delegates watching proceedings. Now, it held only a select group. Commander Vorlag, standing stiffly like a metal statue, his personal Kthar honor guard, equally stiff, the station's highest-ranking non-Kthar official, Chief Administrator Pre. A bird-like alien from a species known for diplomacy, who looked extremely flustered, his colorful head feathers drooping with stress, and, most worryingly, several very high-ranking alien leaders who had been present during the earlier trade talks. Lyra recognized the imposing figure of the Vargonian ambassador, a massive, craggy-faced being known for his bluntness and his species' long history of military power. On the big wall screens, analysts were displaying streams of corrupted computer code, with certain sections highlighted, the fake Glyptian markers. The trap was set. "Attaché Lyra," Vorlag began, his voice amplified slightly, echoing in the tense, silent room. His hidden eyes bored into her. "Explain this. Explain how a dangerous piece of malware, sophisticated enough to cripple this station's vital trade network, bears the unmistakable programming signature of your technologically limited species." The pause before limited was deliberate, dripping with contempt. "Commander, I assure you," Lyra said, fighting to keep her voice from trembling, forcing her skin back towards a semblance of calm blue, though patches of fear yellow and angry purple kept pulsing through. "Glyptos lacks the capability to create such a thing. We certainly have no motive for attacking the Concordat network. This is a mistake, or we are being framed." "Or," Vorlag cut her off sharply, taking a deliberate step closer. The polished surface of his gray armor reflected the room's lights menacingly. Or perhaps it was a desperate act, an emotional outburst from a species feeling overlooked, feeling powerless? A way to cause chaos, to disrupt the proceedings? Your people are ruled by irrational impulses, are they not? Easily swayed by momentary feelings. "Having feelings does not make us irrational, Commander," Lyra shot back, the injustice of it making her voice stronger. That old, familiar sting of being dismissed as simple, emotional children. "And it certainly doesn't give us advanced hacking skills we don't possess. Doesn't it?" Vorlag pressed on, his voice dropping slightly, taking on an almost silky, dangerous quality. He gestured towards her. "Your feeling broadcasts. Your constant, uncontrolled emotional pollution. We have documented complaints about its disruptive influence. Perhaps this logic bomb is merely a cruder, more direct form of the interference your kind constantly emits into the galactic community." He took another step. "Look at you now. Skin flashing like a cheap docking bay warning light. You cannot even control your own biological functions. How can the Concordat possibly trust such an unstable species with important matters? With security? With membership itself?" Lyra finally saw it clearly. He wasn't just accusing her of this specific crime. He was putting her entire species on trial, right here, right now, in front of these powerful leaders. He was using this fake crisis to paint all Glyptians as unstable, unreliable, dangerous. He was trying to provoke her, to push her into an emotional outburst right here, to prove his point that they were too volatile, too alien, to belong. The unfairness of it all, the lie, the setup, the decades of being looked down upon, the memory of Ryland being dragged away, the closure of her little exhibit, Vorlag's cold contempt, it all crashed down on Lyra at once. It felt like a physical weight pressing on her chest, squeezing the air out of her lungs. She couldn't breathe. Her big Glyptian eyes filled with hot tears of helpless anger and desperate fear, tears she refused to let fall. The colors on her skin went completely haywire, swirling and flashing in a chaotic storm, burning red rage, deep blue sorrow, stark white terror, vibrant purple indignation. And then, something deep inside her, some core part of her being that she usually kept carefully shielded, just broke. She didn't choose it. She didn't control it. It was like a dam holding back a lifetime of suppressed hurt and frustration bursting wide open. Her bioempathetic field didn't just pulse or spike. It erupted outwards like a shockwave. It wasn't just a vibe anymore. It was a raw, unfiltered, overwhelming torrent of pure feeling. Her terror of being falsely accused in front of the galaxy, the burning shame of being publicly humiliated, the deep, aching sadness for her people, always pushed to the side, the white-hot fury at the calculated injustice of Vorlag's scheme, all of it mixed with 60 years of collective Glyptian memory of being misunderstood, dismissed, and patronized within the Concordat. It was the psychic scream of her soul, amplified to an unbearable intensity. The wave of raw emotion washed over the chamber. It hit everyone differently. Chief Administrator Pre squawked loudly, his feathers puffing out in alarm as he stumbled back. The massive Vargonian ambassador let out a low growl deep in his chest, his rocky fists clenching, his own species likely processing the input as a direct challenge before his ancient mind recognized its source. Dr. Thorne, who had somehow managed to slip into the room during the commotion, had his scientific recorder out, his face a mask of intense academic focus mixed with genuine human concern for Lyra. But the effect on Commander Vorlag was total system failure. His Cthar mind, rigorously trained for centuries, perhaps even genetically engineered, to suppress and control internal emotional signals, had absolutely no defense against such a massive, raw, external flood. Lyra's wave of pure feeling slammed into his consciousness like a physical force. His carefully built mental walls of logic and discipline didn't just crack, they instantly disintegrated into dust. He staggered backwards, a strangled gasp tearing through his helmet speaker, the first sound anyone had heard from him that wasn't perfectly flat and controlled. His armored hands flew up to clutch his helmet, as if he could physically block out the overwhelming psychic noise. His sharp, analytical eyes went wide behind the visor slit, losing all focus, becoming glassy pools of shock and utter confusion. Then, the breakdown began. He wasn't just feeling Lyra's overwhelming emotions, they were resonating deep within him, striking chords, unlocking doors to hidden rooms in his own mind where his own suppressed feelings had been locked away for his entire life. Lyra's terror became his terror, amplified by decades of his own buried anxieties about failure and control. Her sense of injustice ignited his own secret, bitter resentments against superiors or rivals. Her deep sorrow touched some hidden, personal grief he had ruthlessly walled off years ago. "No," he whispered, the word trembling, distorted by the vocoder. "Make it stop. Get it out. Get it out of my head." His whole armored body started to shake, fine tremors running through the rigid metal plates. He stumbled back again, crashing into a data console. Alarm shrieked, unnoticed in the sudden, stunned silence of the room. "The schism," he mumbled, his head whipping around, eyes darting wildly behind the visor, seeing threats that weren't there. "They warned us. The chaos, it's inside, it was always inside me." And then, to the absolute, stunned disbelief of every alien watching, Commander Vorlag, the cold, logical, emotionless symbol of Cthar discipline and power, crumpled. His armored knees hit the polished floor with a clang. His head bowed low. A sound ripped from his throat, muffled and metallic through the helmet speaker, but unmistakably a sob. Then another, a raw, ugly sound that shook his entire frame. I never wanted the command." He choked out between the racking sobs, words tumbling out in a broken flood, making no sense to the onlookers but clearly torn from a deep, hidden well of pain. The pressure, always watching, judging. Father said, never good enough, never strong enough. The Cthar guards surrounding him stood absolutely frozen, like statues whose programming had just crashed. Nothing in their brutal, disciplined training had prepared them for this. Their commander, the ultimate example of Cthar strength and control, was kneeling on the floor, weeping like a lost child, babbling about personal failures and long-dead family members, completely and utterly broken, not by a blaster or a blade, but by a tidal wave of borrowed feelings he couldn't comprehend or control. Lyra, the accidental source of this psychic devastation, stood just as stunned as everyone else. As Vorlag collapsed, the intense pressure inside her eased, the dam having burst. Her own feeling field began to settle, the chaotic colors on her skin softening, fading to a pale, shocked lavender. She stared at the shaking figure on the floor. She hadn't attacked him. She hadn't wanted this. She had simply felt, too strongly, too honestly, too openly, in his own rigidly controlled mind, brittle beneath its armor, had shattered against the truth of her emotion. The room was utterly silent, except for Vorlag's ragged, muffled crying. The huge Vargonian ambassador slowly lowered his gaze from the broken Cthar commander to the small, trembling Glyptian attaché. His craggy face was impossible to read, but the usual hardness in his eyes was replaced by a look of deep, serious thoughtfulness. Something fundamental had just shifted in that room, on that station, maybe across the entire Concordat. The old rules didn't seem to apply anymore. Things moved incredibly fast after that. Vorlag was quickly, almost furtively, helped to his feet by his deeply embarrassed and confused guards, hustled out of the chamber, and bundled onto the first available Cthar military transport heading back to their home system. The official Cthar diplomatic statement, released hours later, spoke vaguely of the commander suffering sudden onset of acute neurosensory overload due to unforeseen environmental factors on the station. Nobody in the Concordat believed a word of it. Within hours, station technicians, now free from Vorlag's interference, easily traced the logic bomb. It had nothing to do with Glyptians. It was planted by a desperate corporate rival trying to sabotage the Cthar company's mining bid, using crudely forged Glyptian code markers they probably thought were too simple to be suspicious. Lyra and the entire Glyptian delegation were formally and publicly cleared of all suspicion. Chief Administrator Pre offered multiple, effusive apologies, his head feathers finally smoothing back down. But the real change, the deep change, went far beyond clearing Lyra's name. The incident became known throughout the Concordat almost overnight as the Resonance event. Dr. Thorne's detailed xenopsychological report was widely circulated and discussed at the highest levels. It confirmed Lyra hadn't launched any kind of psychic attack. Vorlag's spectacular breakdown was diagnosed as catastrophic empathic feedback incompatibility. His mind, so rigidly conditioned for emotional suppression, had experienced a total system crash when hit by Lyra's high-amplitude, unfiltered emotional broadcast. The Cthar iron control wasn't strength, it was a dangerous form of brittleness. Suddenly, Glyptians were viewed in a completely new light. The whispers and jokes stopped. Instead, there was a mixture of awe, wary respect, and intense scientific curiosity. They weren't just the emotional species anymore. They were now understood to possess a unique, powerful, even if largely uncontrolled, empathic ability. Alien freighter captains started giving Glyptian ships a noticeably wider berth in the space lanes. Diplomats from powerful species became almost excessively polite, taking great care not to cause any Glyptian distress during meetings. The casual insults and dismissals vanished. New protocols and guidelines were hastily drafted by Concordat committees, not to restrict Glyptians, but to advise other species on how to interact with them safely and respectfully. Recommendations included maintaining calm environments during negotiations, avoiding direct personal confrontations, and, most importantly, understanding that causing intense emotional distress in a Glyptian could have unpredictable and potentially severe consequences for species with highly suppressed or rigidly controlled emotional states, meaning, primarily, the Cthar. The Cthar delegation on Nexus Point became noticeably quieter, their usual arrogance replaced by a cautious reserve. Other species began to openly question the stability and desirability of the Cthar's emotionless model. Lyra became famous overnight, an accidental hero and a reluctant symbol for her people. Offers poured in, promotions within the diplomatic corps, funding for research into Glyptian empathy, invitations to speak at major interspecies conferences. She politely turned down most of the high-profile political offers, choosing instead to accept a more senior position within the expanded Glyptian cultural mission on Nexus Point. Her focus remained the same, building bridges, fostering understanding through education and cultural exchange. But now, when she spoke, the galaxy was actually listening. Several months later, Lyra stood at a large observation window, looking out at the swirling, chaotic, beautiful river of alien life flowing through the main hub of Nexus Point Station. The place still buzzed with energy, but something felt different for her people. She saw other Glyptians mingling in the crowds, walking with a little more confidence, their glowing skin shifting through calmer, more assured patterns of light. They were still a tiny minority, still facing challenges, still learning how to navigate this vast, complex galaxy. But they weren't invisible anymore. They weren't just the emotional ones to be pitted or patronized. Dr. Thorne came up beside her, holding 2 bulbs of a warm Glyptian beverage she had introduced him to. "Funny thing happened today," he said, handing her one. He nodded towards a nearby news screen displaying galactic headlines. The Cathar High Command formally requested Glyptian advisors for their elite hostage negotiation teams. He raised his eyebrows. Turns out, having someone on your side who can potentially project overwhelming waves of calm, or maybe even focused panic, directly into a perpetrator's mind might be considered a valuable tactical asset. Who knew? Lyra watched a group of young Glyptian students laughing together across the plaza, their skin sparkling with shared joy, a warmth that seemed to radiate outwards, touching even the stoic-looking rock creature vendor nearby. "We never wanted power, Eris," she said softly, her own skin glowing a gentle, hopeful green. "We never asked for any of this. We just wanted people to understand us, to see us as we are." "Sometimes, Lyra," Thorn replied, looking out at the diverse crowd, "understanding is the biggest power there is. And sometimes, you have to make people understand, even when it's uncomfortable." Lyra nodded slowly, taking a sip of the warm drink. The galaxy was still vast, still complicated, still full of prejudice and misunderstanding. But things were changing, slowly, like a giant tapestry being rewoven with new threads, new colors, new patterns. The Glyptian thread, once thin, fragile, and hidden in the shadows, now glowed with its own unique, undeniable light. Their journey forward wouldn't be easy. There would be fear, suspicion, maybe even attempts to control or exploit their ability. But they had found their voice, found their resonance point in the heart of the Concordat. The galaxy was finally learning to listen, learning to feel, even if that lesson had begun with the shocking sound of a single, tightly controlled heart breaking wide open. And in that raw, vulnerable honesty, the Glyptians had revealed a strength no one, least of all themselves, had ever expected, a strength that was already changing the future among the stars.